second presenter for today, Mark Poesch. Mark Poesch is an associate professor at the University of Alberta. Dr. Poesch's research focuses on three related objectives in aquatic conservation and fisheries management. The main research objectives are to, one, understand the loss of aquatic biodiversity due to global change. Two, understand dispersal and connectivity of freshwater fish populations. And three, develop novel approaches for the management of aquatic biodiversity. Mark has published over 100 scientific papers on fish ecology. He has been a member of both the provincial and federal groups that determine candidate listings of freshwater fish species at risk. He is also the current president of the Mid-Canada chapter and past president of the Canada Aquatic Resources section of the American Fisheries Society, the largest professional fisheries organization in the world. He is also an associate editor of the Canadian Journal of Fisheries and Aquatic Science, a leading journal addressing research in fisheries and aquatic ecology. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mark.
Excellent. Thanks, Rachel. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you great. Thanks.
Okay, give me 1 second. Oh, hang on. Got this one. Share. Sorry, I think I hit the wrong button. It's the share button's right next to end event.
That's okay.
Apologies.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, can you see something coming up on your screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Perfect. Awesome.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate the kind introduction. A lot of the work I'm going to describe has been based on thesis-based work by Jackie Pollard, so I'd like to recognize her, as well as a number of other students that are in my lab. And it's titled Multifaceted Influences on Bull Trout, Implications for Conservation and Management. I'd like to thank Wes Fraser for supporting this work, as well as FRIA. And as you may be aware, or maybe not aware, there is a drastic decline in freshwater vertebrates across the globe, and indeed here in Alberta. And one of the issues is that there's no real smoking gun. If there were, this probably would be relatively easy to solve. We have a number of contributing factors that play a role in these declines, including overharvest or exploitation, habitat degradation, which is thought to be one of the main causes of decline, pollution, invasive species, which we see quite drastically, and changes in flow. The result has been in North American waters a 40 or 81% decline over the past 42 years. We see this also around the globe. So freshwater fish are in crisis. And we see this on our eastern slopes in Alberta. So not just for bull trout, but we see it for other species as well. Things like Arctic grayling, Athabasca rainbow trout, West Slope cutthroat trout. So a lot of our native trout on the eastern slopes are going through decline. The figure here is from the Government of Alberta's Fish Sustainability Index, and it shows some predictions about what's happening on the ground. So black in this map is functionally extirpated. They no longer occur. Red is under very low levels of sustainability, orange low, and yellow moderate, with green and dark green being sort of the areas where they're doing well. And this is just for bull trout. And you can see sort of it gives a pretty damning perspective on what bull trout are facing. Bull trout were once abundant throughout the eastern slopes, and in fact had reached as far east as Edmonton in the North Saskatchewan River, which obviously is no longer the case. Populations in Alberta have already declined and are expected to continue to decline by over 30% over the next 3 generations. And so bull trout are an indicator species looking at some of these losses from the factors I previously described. In collaboration with Wes Fraser and Freya, we've been studying bull trout habitats and other impacts throughout the eastern slopes. And so I should also recognize Kelsey Cure and Leo Fagnan, who have been instrumental in this partnership. A lot of the work I'm describing now has been published. So in the lower right is the article that's out now, and I put a link there that if you are interested, you can find. And several of the other ones are in the sort of later stages of publication. We have one that's just about to roll over and another one that's in review. And so we did quite a bit of work on the ground, assessing where bull trout were and some of those impacts I described, with the idea that understanding where bull trout are and their limiting factors, we can help aid in their recovery. So the first objective we had was to look at sort of niche or habitat overlap with bull trout, with brook trout, and brown trout. So brook trout and brown trout are non-native species. They're the invasive species found in the area, and they do overlap with bull trout. So understanding the impact of these invasives is really important to look at sort of the habitat that's available and being used. The second objective was looking at dietary competition with these non-native trout. So not just are they related to in habitat, but are they feeding on similar things? And is this causing competition? And the final objective was, well, if either of those are happening, either there is competition for habitat or diet, is there an impact on their condition? And condition here is just a ratio of length to weight, which is commonly used in fisheries. So for these studies, we were looking in the eastern slopes, sort of in and around Airdrie. Airdrie is sort of here in the, you can't really see in the bottom right. And we tried to pick streams that had varying species compositions. So here the acronym is BLTR, that's bull trout dominated. BKTR is brook trout dominated. BNTR is brown trout dominated, and various mixtures of them, with the idea of using sort of natural breaks to create sort of these varying scenarios of competition. And so they're spread across the South Saskatchewan drainage, the Red Deer drainage, and North Saskatchewan drainage. And the bottom right here just showing that there is not that much variation in stream temperature elevation. So we did a lot of field work to try and support these projects. And just to give you some nitty gritty, for habitat component, we did 300-meter sites. These are based on the weightable stream protocol, small stream protocol by the government of Alberta. But what we did was we divided them into transects, 6 transects per site, and we measured habitat in each of those transects. So we have sort of a hierarchical design. So we did habitat surveys at each transect. We looked at factors such as land use, including the forestry, closeness to stocking locations, as well as in-stream habitat and surrounding riparian area. Jackie was really the lead. This is now published in developing a multi-species occupancy model. It's an N mixture model. It's quite robust in its ability to look at predicting species relative to other species. So bull trout relative to brook or brown trout. So those interactions are considered here, as well as if you're as well as non-perfect detection. Sorry about that. You just switch over. Okay, can you see again? Okay, so that's the habitat component. There's also a dietary component. So as we were out there sampling fish, using electrofishing, angling, etc., we also sampled the invertebrates using sort of the Canadian the cabin protocol. So we did kick net surveys. We used pan traps to look at terrestrial insects, so that we get a sense of what they're feeding on. And so we took caudal clips of bull trout because we were not allowed to lethally sample those, and we took dorsal samples for some brook trout and brown trout. And we measured periphyton, terrestrial, and aquatic vegetation as a component of the diet as well. I'll circle back to this in a moment. For condition, as I mentioned, is a length-weight relationship. So we use the captured fish to develop these condition factors. This is just to show the differences in abundance and size of the varying species. So we have bull trout on the top left, brook trout on top right, brown trout on the bottom left, and other. And so we do have a large amount of variation in fork length. Just to say that we caught quite a bit of the size distribution of these species in these areas, which I think just goes to show that we had a relatively robust sampling design. This similarly is our count. There is differences. Here is the distribution of our benthic invertebrate, just diversity by family. And there is some variation, but overall we captures quite similar across our different streams. So this is right out of the paper I mentioned and looking at the habitat component. So here the green is bull trout just on its own. The purple is bull trout with brown trout, and the yellow is bull trout with brook trout. And we had some interesting results. What we found was water temperature was a really driving force. So bull trout, both alone and with brown trout, were largely in decline. Their abundance was in decline when water temperatures increased. And we sort of had this inflection point between 10 and 12 degrees Celsius, which others have shown in the literature, which I thought was very interesting. What is also interesting is we didn't see really an effect with brook trout. So brown trout and bull trout together show a temperature effect, but brook trout are doing something a little bit different. We had a positive effect of wetted width, which means that the larger the streams, bull trout tended to do better. No real effect of the proportion of riffle. There was an effect of large woody debris, and no real effect of the proportion of pools. So what we find here is that under different habitat conditions, we find different species compositions doing well. So under lower temperature, we have more bull trout. Under higher or more wetted width, we have more bull trout. And under large woody debris, we have less large woody debris. We tend to find more bull trout under these competition scenarios. For diet, we used a relatively well-known analytical tool of stable isotopes. So the use of carbon and nitrogen isotopes in the environment tell us something about what these fish are feeding on. So the isotopic ratio of nitrogen 15 tells us what trophic position. So are they piscivorous, feeding on higher trophic levels like other fish, or are they lower in the food web? And carbon 13 tells us sort of where are those dietary components coming from? Are they terrestrial or aquatic? And once you fractionate these, you could develop these sort of ellipses. And these ellipses tell us sort of how much competition or sharing of resources do we expect. And so the more overlap of these ellipses, the more we can expect that competition with non-native trout are a factor. So when we look at these, and they're a bit messy, what we see is that there is a large overlap when we have competition. In these scenarios, from the left, we start off at single species, and relative to the other effects, they are relatively separated, although there is quite a bit of overlap. But when we start to get in 2 species or 3 species competition scenarios, there is a lot of overlap, which suggests that there is going to be some competition. These species are feeding on very similar things from similar areas. We do see, so this is a graph here of looking at niche width. This is another way of looking at what is happening on the ground. So in this case here, the bigger or the higher the number, the larger the niche width is, which means that they are feeding on more variety of items. And we see a sort of, this is a non-significant but an interesting relationship that as we increase the number of species present, our niche width increases generally, which means that the fish are starting to looking at other resources that are available, perhaps less nutritionally valuable resources. And so we find what others have found is that there are interaction effects between bull trout and these 2 non-native species, brook trout and brown trout. And as far as the recovery of bull trout, what we say in the paper is that we can't consider a situation where attempting to recover species habitat without considering these interaction effects. That is to say, we could spend a lot of money on the ground changing habitat, but without changing the composition of the species, we're going to have we're not going to be very successful because brook trout and brown trout are utilizing similar resources as bull trout, both habitat-wise and dietarily. Okay, and so we have, for example, between brook trout and bull trout, evidence that there is high niche overlap, so high overlap of habitat, without evidence of them partitioning that niche. That means they're not utilizing different aspects, they are overlapping with one another, and that there may be this exclusion of higher reward prey. So that's bull trout are starting to search for other varieties of prey that are not maybe their most rewarding. For brown trout, similarly, we show high niche overlap. In this case, brown trout, we show some display, or bull trout showed some displacement, which means that when we found brown trout, we saw bull trout moving, shifting their resource use. But in the overall, they were not avoiding competition. They were just changing some of what they were feeding on. So both cases show direct competition, and in case of brown trout, also displacement, which has been shown by many others. It just goes to show that the solution to recovering bull trout and other fish species at risk has to consider these other species that are present, as well as the habitat, temperature, amongst other things. This is a plot of condition. So the y-axis just shows a condition factor, and the red line, for your convenience, just shows you sort of the reference condition factor. So anything above that red line suggests that the fish are in good condition, and anything below that line, they are less so. And we looked at different scenarios. Here, we just looked at competition scenarios. And so when we have no competition, we actually have the best condition of bull trout. When we have brook trout present, that actually goes down, although it is higher than our reference level. And under all competition scenarios, it's somewhere in between. So not surprisingly, these results are sort of marginally significant, but not surprisingly, when their bull trout are under no competition, they have the best condition factor. Prey didn't show to be a really strong result, so whether prey fish were present or not. But what's interesting was that the amount of aquatic macroinvertebrates did have a very strong role. So if the more dietary invertebrates that were present, we see increase in condition for bull trout. And again, under temperature scenarios, at about 11C, we really start seeing a deterioration in bull trout condition. So when I said there's no smoking gun, what we see is it depends on which non-native trout are present. It depends on the abundance of macrophytes, and it depends on the stream temperature. So what do we know? Well, again, it's very context dependent, and this is a sort of complex system, but we have sort of an idea that bull trout occupancy is driven by things like in-stream cover, stream size, percentage of pool, and water temperature. And some of these other invasive species, such as brown trout and brook trout, have some similar overlaps. So water temperature is an interactive effect. Elevation is really strongly related to temperature. Stream size and cover all play important roles in predicting where these species are found. And we do find broad overlap between these three species. So many of the recovery plans or suggestions for recovery say that we need to conserve for bull trout the 4 C's: cold, clean, complex, and connected. I think in addition to that, we should also consider composition, so species composition, because having cold, clean, complex, and connected habitat historically has been related to bull trout, but in what we're showing now is with these non-native trout species being well adapted, species composition also plays a role. And so we say in our paper that we actually think it should be the 5 C's: cold, clean, complex, connected, and composition. So with that, I'd just like to thank our funders from West Fraser, from FRIA as well. We had a small amount of funding from Alberta Conservation Association and a lot of support of many students in my lab.